All right. There we go. All righty, here we go. Well, welcome in, everybody. It's good to be with you all. We'll get started here in just a second. I'm going to give some time for people to log in now that the live stream has started. And I will be telling you what's up, what we're going to be doing today in just a minute. But in the meantime, tell me where you are all coming from. It would be really cool to see, what part of the country or what part of the world you're coming from. So drop that into the chat box. If you will. I'd love to hear from you guys. All right, there's more people joining. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use just like a little 30-second countdown as we get started. People are joining. All right. Well, welcome in, everyone. This is Adam Ellenboss from Nightlight Astrology. I am doing a live stream this afternoon as a way of promoting our annual Kickstarter, and I'm going to pop on today and do a Q&A episode. Sometimes I do birth chart episodes where I take live charts from the audience and read them. Today, I am going to focus on questions that you have about astrology. So you can literally put any question you have that you'd like me to talk about with respect to astrology. Maybe it's a sign that you want to know more about, or a question that you have about a planetary combination, a question about a house. Anything at all is welcome into the chat box today. I'd be more than happy to take your questions. I thought this would be a fun thing to do, and a little change of pace from doing birth chart readings, which we're going to be doing more of in the month of December as a way of promoting the Kickstarter as well. But before we get into it, let's see where you guys are coming from. So I'm going to scroll down here. Lots of people saying hi, hello, from West Virginia. Nice. West Virginia is a place that is pretty dear to us because we used to go out to West Virginia. There's like a bed and breakfast like out in the country that was like this really weird, unique place called the Inn at Mountain Quest. And it was in West Virginia. And we used to go out there, and it was just really interesting place to go to. So anyway, love West Virginia. Hello from Kansas. Clearwater, Florida. Nice. Diana from Kentucky, welcome in. John from Colorado. Nice to see the Colorado folk here. Lily from New Zealand. That's amazing. Lee, is it Lee? From Texas, welcome. Whitney from Missouri. Let's see. Wow. Amazing. Sharada from Mumbai. Nice. Boston. We've got Washington, Michigan. I don't think I've heard of that. And I lived in Michigan for a while. So New Rochelle, New York. T. Marie Aqua. Nice. Like that handle. Let's see here. Texas. I love the picture. That's great. Let's see here. Marco from the Philippines. Wow. That's a good question, Marco, that you ask. I'll try to come back to that. I'm going to do a little bit more of just like intro and see where people are coming from. Oh, hey, Jessica. Good to see you. Jessica's an old school Nightlight student. All right, let's go ahead and get into it, see some of your questions. And then I don't remember who it was who posted one about something with your wife. Please feel free to post that one again. I'll see if I can get back around to it. Laura says, can you talk about advice for people with a lot of personal natal placements in the same sign as their south node? Well, it really depends on which view of the south node you take. Did you know that there are three? The modern evolutionary view of the south node of the moon, for example, suggests that the material in and around the south node, including the south node by sign and house, is akin to your hangup, your karmic hangup. Okay, so that's like the modern evolutionary perspective, which would suggest that there's a lot of work going in this lifetime to letting go of, whatever is signified by the placement of your south node, along with all those planets in the same sign as your south node. That's like the modern evolutionary point of view. In ancient Hellenistic astrology, the perspective that was used, the perspective that the ancient astrologers had on the nodes of the moon was quite a bit different. They saw the nodes of the moon connected to the broader meaning of the moon itself, which was the ruler of fortune, like the wheel of fortune. The moon, as a symbol in the sky, was seen as like the weaver of life circumstances. And so, there's highs in fortune and there's lows in fortune, and that's relative. So when the moon is crossing, going upward in its trajectory across the ecliptic, it's the ascending node or the north node, pointing upward toward the pole star. It was associated with an increase in fortune, for good or bad. As the moon was crossing the ecliptic, going southward toward the southern horizon or the earth, it was associated with a decrease in fortune, for good or bad. So it's totally contextual. For example, the south node of the moon could be a sign that something surrounding those planets that you have in that house and sign is going to be diminished, because the south node tends to diminish or depress things, and tends to make them, it sort of weakens them. So that's a little abstract and can be challenging to sort out, especially if you have a stellium. It's not like an easy answer that I could give, but the south node may diminish or curb something of what they're trying to express, because it tends toward diminishment as compared to Saturn. However, the south node of the moon is also, it's like, if you have malefic planets like Mars or Saturn, it can actually curb their maleficence. So if you think about it like this, the north node can amplify things for good or bad. You put a Mars with the north node, you have someone like Lance Armstrong, who wanted to win at all costs and did steroids to get bigger. And that's problematic. It just amplifies Mars stuff to a problematic degree in his life. Whereas if you were to take, a cancerous tumor and put it on the south node might diminish it. And that's a good thing. You want a tumor to shrink. Put a tumor with the north node, it grows. You don't want it to grow. So you're looking at the north and south node from the ancient Hellenistic perspective, from the standpoint of increase or decrease, broadly speaking, which has to be read in context within the natal chart, which can make it a lot more nuanced and tricky to describe. So it's not something I could just, do easily over YouTube, but that would be a different perspective than the modern evolutionary perspective. Still different is the Indian perspective, where you have Rahu and Ketu respectively representing the north and south node. And there's a whole mythology around what those planets, those kind of shadow planets in Indian astrology represent. But broadly speaking, Rahu is associated with desires that entangle us and sort of deepen our entanglement in material nature, which isn't a bad thing. We're here to explore our desires, but make no mistake, they saw Rahu as a kind of hungry ghost who would perpetuate the exploration of your desires in ways that were often problematic. Like, I think I should go do this. I really feel compelled to go do this thing or that thing according to the transit of the north node or the placement in your natal chart. But does it actually satiate you? Does it make you as happy as you think it will? No. And that's what's problematic about Rahu, which is also why it was considered a malefic. Whereas Ketu, the south node of the moon, was associated with the crystallization of spiritual insight that often comes through material losses or disappointments, where our desires are frustrated. But we realize the limits of worldly things to ever satisfy us truly. And so Ketu was actually associated with the crystallization of spiritual insight, but also tendencies maybe toward escapism or dissociation from the material world. So you see sometimes Ketu in the south node associated with drugs and alcohol and escape, but you also see it associated with things like the hardships in life, the disappointments that lead to, developing a spiritual practice. So you have options when it comes to the significations of the south node, and then it becomes about interpreting that signification within the context of having a bunch of personal planets in the same sign as the south node, which you probably need an astrologer to do for you if all of that is brand new, right? So anyway, I hope that helps, Laura, and it was a great question. If you, by the way, I am doing this today before I answer more questions. I figure I should take a moment to tell you about the Kickstarter. We have and thank you so much. Someone made a donation. I'm going to tell you where we would really appreciate it if you made a donation, which is at the Kickstarter. So let me pull up that link really quick and take you over there. Or actually, what I'll do is here, I'll just do this. So I'm going to copy the link and put it into the chat box. If you go over to the Kickstarter, you are going to find that there's the link. You can also find it if you go to our website, which is nightlightastrology.com. Click on the 2024 Kickstarter, and you'll be taken over to the Kickstarter. We still need the support of 1,500 plus backers by New Year's Eve. Got off to a little bit of a slow start this year, I think because there was something wonky with Thanksgiving on the calendar, but our first week is usually the week before Thanksgiving, but somehow it landed Thanksgiving week. So it was a little slow. We're starting to pick up the pace, but we have a long ways to go, and we really need the support of our audience to help me, my team, all of the projects that we do to cross the finish line by New Year's Eve. So when you go over there, you can donate absolutely anything. Everything is totally appreciated. 50% off all of my online courses. If you bundle them together, 2, 3, 4 courses, the saving goes up significantly. Come study with us. It would be great to have you in class. You can learn more about ancient astrology in 6 different programs that we offer. So check those out. There's also readings. We have your horoscope for the year ahead reading, which is all of the transits of 2024. My book is on sale through the Kickstarter, my new book. What else? The astrology of 2024 or your sun or rising sign horoscope for 2024. Alex and I do those together, only available through the Kickstarter. So help us reach our goal. We really appreciate it. I come on to do these as a way of just making sure you guys know that I am here for you, that this channel is dedicated to building a really special community of spiritually focused astrology. And once a year for the last 40 days, I come on and also say, hey, if you value this, please consider pitching in and supporting me and my staff. We really, really appreciate it. Anyway, so Katie says, I've been a Kickstarter backer. This is a 3rd year now. Thank you. Did you know that this is our 10th year doing this? It is so cool to see people. We've got people who are like, I've been doing this 3 years. We've got some people who are like, I've been doing this 8 years. You know, I can't say how much I appreciate. Like, this is it's a really weird thing that like most of our revenue as a business, my livelihood, my ability to support a staff of 11 people comes literally because of this Kickstarter. So it's like the whole thing hangs in the balance for the last 40 days of the year every year. I like look into the abyss and I go, well, maybe I'll never be an astrologer again. It's kind of crazy, but I like it because it keeps me humble. It keeps me respectful of why I'm doing this and how dependent I am upon the people who value it. And so I don't know, it's a magical practice that we do. And it's been really cool to do over the years. So I really appreciate your support. Okay, so let's go ahead. I'm going to answer some more questions now. Let's see here. Ooh, interesting. Hi, Adam. Madalena says, hi, Adam. Could you share your view on the transit of Saturn conjunct natal moon, Sade Sati in Vedic astrology? Well, Sade Sati in Vedic astrology actually lasts between Saturn in the sign preceding your moon, during your moon, and after your moon. So it is definitely a long transit. By the way, I want to mention this really quick. I see people making donations through YouTube. Thank you so much. And it doesn't help. Kickstarter's all or nothing funding. So if you can route a donation through Kickstarter, it helps us get to, at the very least, our basic funding goal, which makes sure that the channel is alive and the staff is paid for in the year ahead. Anything beyond that goes toward our stretch goals. So if you have a donation to give, please put it to the Kickstarter and not through the super chat stickers and all that stuff. Although we really appreciate it. And I don't mean any offense, but okay. Anyway, Sade Sati actually happens when Saturn is in the sign preceding your moon, in your moon, and after your moon. So it's a long period of time. And it often coincides with, I would say, major confrontations with ancestral patterns, ancestral karma. When I was in my Sade Sati period, for example, in the preceding year, during and after, I mean, man, it was profound. My grandfather passed, my grandmother passed, and 2 of my uncles passed during that Sade Sati period. So it's no joke. The Indian astrologers I think are really spot on when they say that lunar significations like home, family, parents, ancestral karma, your living environment. We moved during that period. We had our second daughter summer during that period. So the Sade Sati, it doesn't mess around. It's really big for family karma. I think the most intense was obviously when Saturn was in the actual sign of my moon, but it's something that I pay attention to in my client readings for sure. Although I'm always careful because you don't want to communicate about something like Sade Sati in a way that freaks people out, and it really is a period of a lot of healing too, and some loss, right? But a lot of healing. So anyway, I hope that is useful for you, and that helps. So let's see here. Michelle says, can you talk about the significance of a year when your solar return MC is conjunct your natal ascendant? Yeah, I mean, okay, first of all, I encourage all of you. This is like this is one of my soapboxes. If you guys ever decide to study at Nightlight, you'll hear me get on this soapbox a lot. Like if my students are in this, they'll be like, oh God, here goes Adam. It's not a rule. There's no rule. So one of the problems that we have in modern astrology is that in the early modern era, a lot of astrology emerges as an attempt to validate. It's trying to validate itself to like a scientific community, and so it gets into talking about transits, like what happens in your solar return when your mid heaven of your solar turn is conjunct your natal chart. When that happens, when that occurs in your chart, it means this. So you get something like pseudo rules, pseudo law books about all of this stuff. There's no, like in divination, you have to remember that what is significant is what we bring to the context of a reading. So we tend to approach charts looking at them like they're these objective blueprints of things that are going to happen. But actually, when you're looking at a chart, the reason that you have for looking at it is always the most powerful thing you could possibly bring to the chart so that the chart will speak. So does it mean, I can tell you right now, there are going to be, if I took 20 people and met with them and did an astrology reading and they all had that signature, solar return MC conjoined their natal ascendant, for probably half of them, it wouldn't mean anything. Like quite literally, there would be no massive change in their career connected with their identity, right? But let's say 10 of those charts, maybe the other half, there are people who simultaneously have major transits to their 10th house, to their 10th house ruler, to planets in the 10th house, to the sun, which is often connected with life ambition, at which point you notice, oh, look, the midheaven is on the ascendant. So the reason that you have for going to a reading, the reason that you have for looking at the connection between the MC and the ascendant, when you notice that, what you should also notice is, why did I notice that? Well, that's an interesting connection, but usually it will be cluing you into 2 or 3 more pieces of evidence that corroborate to tell a story. So there's no rule for what it means when the midheaven, solar return midheaven is on the progressed, or the ascendant or whatever. There's no like one thing it means or does guaranteed as some kind of rule, because that's not how astrology works. That's not how divination works. Connections of any kind are often, it's like, okay, for example, you know the difference very well. If you're listening to this, sometimes you see that it's 11:11 on your clock, and you know when it means something, because of the context of what's going on in your life. There are other times you're going to pass clocks and you're going to see other significant numbers, or you're going to see an 11:11 and you're going to know it doesn't mean anything because of the context. Because sometimes you see a crow and it's a messenger, and sometimes you see a crow and it's just a crow. How do you know the difference? Context. That's divination. So what I would say broadly is that when you're trying to look at something like that, first of all, okay, yes, could there be some significant overlap between notoriety, public reception, changes in your career and your personal identity or your health? Yes, there could be some valuable connection being made there because those symbols are aligning. But that is not enough on its own to make some kind of rule. It's context that provides that as a meaningful connection. So just remember that. That's all I would say about it. Okay, I hope that was useful. Okay, let's see. Good thing people know that when they give a donation to you, they both support astrology and herbalism. Very cool. Yeah. Did you guys know that through the Kickstarter, the last 2 years, actually dating back 3, but mostly the last 2, you helped build an herbal medicine garden that we have hosted women's gatherings in and free herbal trainings in, that Ashley has taken the medicine from to go into preschools and schools around the area to educate people on herbs, that we've given a ton of the medicine away, that we harvested medicine and just let people come and pick it and harvest it and taught them how to make medicines. That's because of you guys. That was a cool project that we came up with through the Kickstarter that you guys helped us build. So anyway, yeah, like if you want us, so if you'd like to support us, hop on over to nightlightastrology.com, click on the Kickstarter tab and pitch in. We could really use the help. All right. Let's see. I'm going to scroll up and see. There's a lot of questions. These are so awesome. JCFA asks a great question. Sometimes when reading charts from my friends, I find it a little difficult to condense all of the information I want to share without losing them. Any tips on simplifying things? That is a great question. And again, what I'll say is this: because I come from the background of seeing astrology as a divinatory science, like I'll phrase it that way, because it's not like there isn't a really amazing level of logic and astronomy and things like that. But at the end of the day, it is a symbolic language of omens. And so how do we read that? Well, first of all, the biggest mistake that so many people make is sitting down and thinking this chart has some kind of objective information in it that I have to communicate to my client. Think of it like this. It is a mantic device. Imagine that you unearthed some kind of like magical oracular wishing mirror. You could look into it and see things, or like the elf's mirror in Lord of the Rings, the Lady of the Woods in Lothlorien. She's got that like magic mirror of like water. You can look into it and it shows omens and signs. We think that it has something that is objective, that is there, that is concrete, like a blueprint. And you can treat a chart that way, but because it responds to the paradigm that you bring to it as a mantic device, it will respect that approach, and you can try to synthesize tons of information that you prepare in advance and lay out like a report. That's not really the way that ancient astrologers worked with a chart. So what I would highly recommend is, rather than having things that you want to share with the client, when a client sits down, ask them what their questions are. What do you want to talk about? Why are you here? What is important to you right now? Where's your heart at? What's the current events in your life right now? Through that context, symbols in the chart will speak. And your prep is not so much preparing what to say, as much as it is getting to know the landscape of the chart. Not getting to know it from the standpoint of interpreting it, but getting to know it from the standpoint of starting to massage and open the symbolism and starting to turn the jewels of the aspects: the sun, moon, rising, planets and stelliums, angular planets, interesting aspects, dignity patterns. You start massaging the chart like that and starting to turn it, and it starts opening, and lots of images start coming forth. Most of the time, you will have no idea which of those images are actually important to share or not without the context that a client provides, because that's what divination does. Nobody makes the mistake in tarot. For the most part, when people approach a tarot practitioner, they sit down and they say, I have a question. I want to know, maybe it's a question about pregnancy. Maybe it's a question about relationships. Maybe it's a question about a current relationship or a job or a boss. Or people provide context for almost every other form of any other oracle that people visit. Typically they go to with questions and context. Astrology is unique because it has this sort of feigned appearance of like scientific objectivity. It's not that it's not intelligent or that it doesn't have its own kind of grammar, but it's still like the language is there to speak as a living language coming from a living intelligence that the diviner or astrologer is trying to interpret or be some kind of facilitator of, which can only really work and be living and meaningful if the client has something that they're there to talk about. Now that you might actually prepare for in advance. If a client's like, well, look, I want to talk about relationships today. Okay, we'll spend some time looking at Venus, the seventh house, blah, 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 but not because you know what you're going to share, but because you need to get to know the symbols. Then when you get into the reading, what's really important is that you talk to the person. You say, what's going on? What's your relationship life like? What are the questions? What are your concerns? What are your fears? What patterns have existed in your relationships? As they speak, then you're going to start understanding of the myriad images that you've been looking at in this chart, which ones are standing forth. And then you know what to talk about. And then you don't have a problem with economy of craft, because economy of craft has been provided to you by the context that the person brings. You see what I mean? So that's how I would answer that one. Now, let's just honor the kind of approach that anyone might be taking, which is to say, well, I want to prepare a list of things to talk about, because some people come in and they have no context to provide whatsoever. They're like, I just want to hear about my birth chart. I'm curious. Okay. If that's the case, then what I would stick to would be something very, very basic. It is so much better if you can talk about a few things at a very deep level than many things in scattershot fashion that ends up overwhelming the client. So if you're doing just something very generic and general, which I really don't think is the best kind of astrology, by the way, do something like sun, moon, rising with the ruler of the ascendant, major aspects to the sun or moon, the moon's phase, stuff like that, the house positions of those planets. Tell a story, try to weave it together meaningfully. And honestly, for a first hour, if someone's never had a reading or they're looking for something just kind of basic with no context that they're providing you with, I don't think you really need to go much farther than that. Once a context is provided, then you have something to really work with. So anyway, that's my take. I hope it's useful. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Hey, Dad. I just saw you were here. Oh, that's nice of you. Thank you. All right, let's see. What can we do to weave more divination into our astrological practices? Well, the first thing I would say is to remember that astrology, this is just my opinion, okay? You don't have to agree with this, obviously, but astrology is divination. So there's no need to weave anything into it in that respect. But if you have a hard time remembering that that's what astrology is actually doing, that your birth chart has radically different things to say about who you are, your life, your psychology, depending on why you approach it, at what time of life you approach it, because it's not a static image. It appears like it's a static image because it's always the same planets in the same houses, but context provides a different angle upon which to enter the archetypes, and that is different at every single time that we approach the oracle. And if you treat it like that, you will notice that your relationship with the chart and with astrology itself becomes divinatory, which is also why I say don't spend too much time fixating on your own chart, because you'll make the mistake of thinking that it's the same thing all the time. But anyway, what can we do to weave more? So aside from that, I would say, like one of the things that's a good idea or that can really help is when you're looking at an astrological transit and you're trying to understand the different archetypal qualities of that transit, draw a card or two from the tarot. Reflect on the symbolism of the cards if you know them in relation to the transit, not just in one way. Like the cards aren't there to break the code. They're there to use as more light to bounce off the jewel and to help you turn it in different angles. So just, do stuff. Or the I Ching. The I Ching is a great one that you can use as well. Lily says, I am a Kickstarter supporter. Thank you. Thank you so much. We really, really appreciate it. Change of Heart 77 says, I appreciate how you communicate omens, ancestry, how this is living in special work. I really feel that through Nightlight. Thank you. That's awesome, because that's definitely a big part of our mission. And it is for Ashley too. Yeah. Let's see. There's some really profound questions in here. Probably some of them would take me down a wormhole. So I'm going to try to be a little bit careful. There was one though, from a gentleman who was really, okay, here it is. Marco, finally, I got back to your question. Thanks for being patient. Will my wife's depression stop, or there should be a resolution if Pluto will be on Aquarius? She is Aquarius ascendant. Her sun and Mercury is in 12th house Capricorn. Okay. Well, first of all, I have no idea. That's the honest answer. And but my prayer is that that she might find a way to work through whatever heaviness she's carrying. That's and I hope that others who are listening or reading any comments in the comment section where it's clear that people are hurting, that we as a community, when you see that, even just taking 2 seconds to just be like, may something good and constructive come to that person, is, I think, that's the first helpful thing we can always do. Well, one thing that can happen if Pluto moves into the first house and out of the 12th, it can certainly bring the impetus for change into a more conscious sphere. So the 12th house was called a blind spot. It's in aversion to the ascendant in the kind of Greek optical theory that was used to explain how planetary aspects worked within the great circle, the kind of geometric configurations that the planets make to one another. There were said to be blind spots in the circle where one zoidion or zoidia, which is like a name for a sign, cannot see another one by any type of geometric configuration that the Greeks considered to be a part of the communication between the different portions of the zodiac. So interestingly, these are two Saturn ruled signs, Capricorn and Aquarius, in the 12th and the 1st. And so one of the things that sometimes Saturnian people, when Saturn is your ascendant ruler, will struggle with will be melancholy. In our masterclass on temperament and personality that we did recently, we talked about melancholy and we talked about remediation for melancholy. Do you know, one of the main things that ancient writers said about melancholy was that sometimes people suffered from simply having a hard time embracing their own nature. For example, sometimes melancholics are introverts. This is just a really basic example, but like, our world tells us that there's something wrong with you if you're an introvert. And so sometimes the way out of depression is to normalize things about yourself that the world has told you are problematic or that make you other somehow. I mean, you have people like Nina Simone dealing with Saturn in Aquarius in the 1st house and, being told by both her family and a prejudiced society that she was not good enough to be a musician. She changed her name even to hide the fact that she was singing blues and jazz from her family, who thought it was the devil's music. That's a Saturn in the 1st house kind of person. But it could also be Saturn in the 12th, where you feel that there's something that marks you as other or apart, and that it's heavy to carry that. Or that you somehow feel like you can't, I've said this before, but like, you're in the hut at the edge of the village. Somehow life has marked you in such a way. So one of the things that we do to remediate, like as an astrologer, when you're talking to someone who's dealing with like a Saturnian affliction when it comes to their character or psychology, is sometimes it's very basic. It's helping them understand like, it's okay to be a hermit. It's okay to be a little bit of a loner or an introvert. It's okay to be a little bit more contemplative or turned away from the world or otherworldly, all Saturnian features of personality, especially associated with melancholy. It's okay to be romantic and wistful, to have severe emotions, and to not feel like it's easy to be with other people. Those things make you beautiful, not bad. Sometimes it's just as simple as normalizing stuff like that. And often it's not nearly that simple, right? It's because people can really, really suffer in so many different ways with Saturn-ruled ascendants. But that's one thing that sometimes comes to mind. The other thing is sometimes the antidote to a Saturnian ascendant is to kind of you have to almost do the opposite. So if Saturn, sometimes people who have Saturnian afflictions are socially anxious. And so it's about how can I heal my nervous system, and, sort of, if there's been measures put in place to protect yourself, but they've been isolating, how can I open up? But not so much that it feels like it's not reflective of who I am or what feels safe to me, but like, how can I get out in the sunshine a little bit, so to speak, where Saturn is so distant and remote that sometimes the Saturnian ruled ascendant's affliction is, look, I have to find ways of coming into the sunlight, whatever that might mean, and however big a step or little a step that might be at different stages of healing. So sometimes it's like normalizing who you are and how you are. And sometimes it's like you got to step out of the shadows of Saturn and into the sunlight, which is the natural planetary opposite of Saturn, the sun. Sometimes it's about building confidence, and it's about building luminosity, and it's about finding joy. And sometimes it's about normalizing that you're a melancholic, restless, romantic soul, you know? Anyway, those are just some generic thoughts about Saturn ruled ascendants. But one thing that Pluto can do when it enters the first house is it can create the impetus for change. That change could be in the direction of radical self-acceptance, which ironically may make a person who's introverted feel more happy with being introverted, but then ironically they start shining more, you know. Or Pluto entering the first house could be the impetus for transformation that allows someone to go from a kind of isolated or maybe somewhat more dissociated like mental sphere, which is pretty common for Aquarius, into a more embodied space. Regardless of which way it goes, or there's so many other possibilities that, you know, that we could talk about, but Pluto in the first house creates the conditions through which the soul is ready to metamorphosize. It's like, okay, I'm ready for a complete transformation of identity, of body, of psyche, and that transformation is sometimes, you know, sometimes it's a little heavy, sometimes it's a little scary. But I think that people, especially people who have, you know, Sun in the 12th house, it's much better to get Pluto out of the 12th house carrying into the first, because now you can work more consciously. Like we were saying about the blind spot in the 12th. Well, Pluto moving into the first allows things to come forth. And it's like, well, you know, at least I'm bringing up the need for personal healing or transformation into a conscious space, as opposed to wrestling with the demons of the 12th that are so hard to name or identify. You know, they come and go. So anyway, those are some thoughts. Marco, I hope that those are helpful. And I hope that, you know, your wife is able to find some healing, and you know, and also just prayers for you that, you know, I can only imagine it must be challenging to be holding space, you know, for someone you love. You want to see a certain result. You also, you know, you may only be able to do so much, you know, all of those things that make it complicated. So anyway, thanks, Marco. We appreciate your question. Let's see here. Let's see. So many great questions, you guys. Thank you. You know what? Before I go forward again, I want to remind everybody that I'm here in the hopes that you will support the Kickstarter. So if you have not yet gone over to the Kickstarter, please consider supporting this channel. Please consider supporting me and my staff. You can find the link to the Kickstarter in the comments section. You can also head over to the website, which is nightlightastrology.com. Click on the Kickstarter 2024 tab. Pick up a reward, help us meet our goal. We still need like 1,500 some people who like this content to pitch in and help us. So thank you everyone who already has. Pitch in if you haven't yet. We really appreciate it. Okay, so let's go. I'm going to scroll back up through questions. I like this one. How might you explain someone going through major transits from the outers, plus eclipses on the angles, but seeing little to no change in their life? Okay, so there's a few answers to this. First of all, in just like a really practical sense, it could be that their birth time is off. right? So it could be that there's some inaccurate birth data. Like I have seen that happen before, and people are like, "Oh, okay, that like really helps." Like maybe the time is wrong and the houses are wrong, or something like that. So one explanation. Um, Another one is maybe less. I don't know. It's less. It's a less generous interpretation. I'm not a big fan of it, but it is It is a possible answer that we should at least talk about, which is that sometimes these things are happening in ways that are really deeply unconscious. Let me just give you an example. I have had many clients over the years, and one of the clients that I'll never forget, was a long time ago. Um, this person came in for a reading, and basically, this is how they described their existence to me. Um, Very unfortunate. They were receiving disability, and so they weren't working. They were kind of a, what do you call it? Is it called not a shut-in? What is it called? Like a hermit. They basically lived by themselves. They didn't like interacting with people. They really had no friends. They watched Netflix all the time. They didn't really do anything. They were interested in astrology and watched lots of YouTube stuff, including mine. But they had a busier period of life earlier in life, and then an unfortunate accident, and then disability, and then they just kind of shut themselves off from the world. And they were like, "Well, I've got all these transits going on, but nothing's happening." I was like, "Well, I think on some level, the transits reflect archetypal fields that are moving through us. But if we're not moving much in the world, like if we're not doing much, not that there's I'm not judging anyone for what, like that's this person's reality. And so it is. And there's no judgment on my part. But like, also, if we have no intention of making any changes, it's not super realistic to expect that transits will come along and radically change everything for you, right? The transits are oracular. People make the mistake of thinking of them. There's an energetic dimension to planets, don't get me wrong, but people think of them as purely like energies that are making things happen. They're not. They're omens, signs, symbols that reflect different things happening. Like the hand of a clock says it's 3 o'clock, doesn't cause it to be 3 o'clock. The planets aren't causing anything to happen, but they are omens, and they reflect moving archetypal patterns that live in the psyche. But they, like, just because the planets are moving doesn't mean that there's some kind of causal force that will make anything happen. This is why I say context is so important for an astrology reading, because the context of how you're choosing to live your life and what things you're concerned with and why you approach an oracle in the first place are so vital for they're like the lightning rod that connects to the lightning, and in that sense makes the symbols speak something of relevance to what you're dealing with. But there's a lot of people, my experience is that if there's no participation, if we're not sort of living a life, by enacting a choose your own adventure on some level, which is not, I don't mean that I'm not trying to place any blame or judgment on someone, but it's like, you can't expect that the planets are going to do things to you or for you. It's really not the best way of thinking about them. In the same way that, like, I want to put it this way: if you are watching MTV 24/7 and smoking weed, and you smoke and you lay down a bunch of tarot cards, and you ask, like, you cast the cards and you go, "Wow, it looks like I should be getting a job." It's like, yeah, but it'll probably require that, like, you not smoke all the time. Or, like, I'm just making this up, like, and you'd like turn off MTV. So the signs don't do the work for us. The omens and signs can reflect things, but they're most of the time, it really shouldn't be understood as causal dynamics. And there's some need to participate. So, like I said, I don't mean to say that, like, okay, well, it's just like people who are unconscious, who are not participating in life, don't get transits, because sometimes that's going to be true, but sometimes it's not. So that's another possible answer. And then finally, I would just say that sometimes there are things happening, really significant things, but people don't recognize them or know how to identify them. It takes an astrologer helping you put those pieces together. So I have found many, many times that someone will come in and they'll say, "Oh, I'm not getting anything from Neptune on the moon." No, and I'll be like, "Well, what's going on in your life?" And they'll be like going through all this stuff, and all of a sudden they'll tell me that their daughter is struggling with alcoholism. And I'll be like, "Well, how did you not think that Neptune on your moon was related to that?" You know what I mean? Not to be a jerk, but like a lot of the times people just don't know how to identify the transits within the scope of all of the things happening around them in their life. So those are all possible answers. But I think the one I like as well is that, like, if you turn to the chart constantly, just being like, okay, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? What's going to happen? There's something about that all oracles seem to just stop working. You flip too many cards, they stop meaning anything. You look at your chart all the time, stops meaning anything. So it's and I'm not suggesting that transits only work if like you have some kind of, I mean, there's many examples where people I know who have no interest in astrology whatsoever, like you look at their charts, or my kids, they don't know astrology yet. I can look at their charts and see when my daughter gets a cold or something. So, but there is something to be said about like the things we do to sort of shut the oracle down from speaking. Anyway, these are all just ideas. Hope they help. All right. My new ambition in life is watching MTV and smoking weed all day. Okay. Oh, gosh. Let's see. All right. Let's see what else you guys got. I'll take a few more. Holy bananas, Batman. Someone just got a 4-class pass. That's awesome. That is our best deal. The 4-class pass allows you to take any 4 of our 6 programs. You can gift them to anyone you want. You can use, they never expire. You can use them whenever you want. And yeah, it's like 75% off the normal cost of any of our classes. That's our 10th anniversary special. Thank you. We're slightly closer to our goal now, and that is awesome. Yeah, guys, it's like, the thing that's hard about answering these questions is it's like, I'm an astrologer. I have a lot of experience. I've been doing this for a long time. I've seen a ton of clients. I've taught a lot of classes. I've studied a lot of the history of astrology. But still, these answers are like the best ones I've heard. I don't ever mean to present them like, well, this is the only way of thinking about it. And it's hard to ride that line between being like an expert or something of an authority in your field without coming across so cocksure that you don't leave room for being wrong about the things that you yourself are still curious about, Okay. Let's see. I'm going to go up. This question has come up like 10 times already, so I'm just gonna take it, because why not? I've been a follower for a while now and am very keen to get a reading in the future. Can you tell me, what does astrology say about aliens, UFOs, universal consciousness? Well, first of all, I just love this question because yeah, it's just a fun it's a fun thing to pontificate about. I will tell you right away that I am no like ambassador to the alien colonies, nor have I been in touch with any. So I don't know. I just have no idea. But I have thoughts about the subject that I've obviously reflected on through astrology and also psychedelic experiences, especially. Here is what I will say. We're going to be talking about this when I revisit Pluto moving into Aquarius, because wasn't it interesting that last year, right as soon as Pluto moved into Aquarius, we had all of these like sightings of balloons and like I actually was on a walk one night and I totally got fooled because I saw that Starlink satellite, the Elon Musk internet thing that flies through the sky. I had never seen it before. I had no idea what it was. And there were all these things in the news about UFOs and everything. You guys remember that, like last March or whatever it was? I was out walking in the winter here in Minnesota and I looked up and I saw that and I was like, oh My God, I freaked out, man. I just lost my shit for a second. And then I like sent a picture of it to a friend and he was like, dude, that's a Starlink satellite. Me and my dad were on a walk and we saw that and got freaked out too, like a while ago. And I was like, oh God, okay. But anyway, like, of course, to me, it was like, it seems foolish. Like, I love the movie Contact. You guys ever seen Contact? It just seems foolish to me, first of all, to imagine a universe. We have a universe, with billions and billions of galaxies and, hundreds of trillions of stars, whatever. We're like, the immensities are something that our brain just goes, okay, it's like my little girl going, I love you, Dad. I love you more. No, I love you more. And then you know what always gets it to the top? I love you infinity. Like you win. You always do, because she gets to infinity first. But it's like that. It's like we're looking at the infinite, Well, that's what it's like. The scale is like to us. So when I think about something that vast, how limited and narrow-minded does it appear to me to say, well, we're it, So just I start there. I go like the likelihood to me that there are other civilizations, that there are other intelligent species of life all throughout the cosmos, to me is like, I just believe it to be true at this point. I can't even imagine it not being so. I guess if you were to tell me that we were the only ones in the universe, and like it was still this divine or like orchestrated thing, I would be like, well, I mean, that's kind of like a Twilight Zone episode, but like, well, who am I to say? Like, okay, So, but I think when I think about aliens, I think a lot about Pluto moving into Aquarius, and I think first of all that there's like the level of like, could there be aliens? Are there aliens? And like, then you have to ask the question, well, what would it mean to the human species if we discovered somehow that there were? Set aside whether they're good aliens or bad aliens, or they're abducting us or shoving probes up our butt or like whatever. But just like, what would the discovered fact of like alien life do for human beings? I think it would do two things. One, I think it would draw out something within us that we don't even understand how deeply we're grappling with, and that is a sense of cosmic alienation. Now, I do not believe that like a huge majority of the indigenous peoples around the planet, I do not believe had such an experience of alienation. Like the reason I think that is not because I'm some expert on indigenous peoples or anything like that. It's because when I went to the Amazon and drank ayahuasca with curanderos, like native people who were steeped in the Amazon medicine and its rituals and its medicine and these altered states that were coming right out of the earth in the Amazon jungle. These were people who were talking to plants, like literally talking to them. I'm not talking about like metaphorically talking to them, interpreting their symbolism like creatively, that there's nothing really there. No, I mean like going into altered states and approaching plants and speaking with their spirits, speaking with their intelligence, and them literally teaching them how to use different plants for medicine. These same traditions, when you drink ayahuasca, and I don't mean this to be like, oh, there are many ways of altering your states, and psychedelics are not for everyone. So I'm not trying to like glorify ayahuasca here, but like when you drink ayahuasca, you literally have a perception of the universe as this vast place that's teeming with life that you can communicate with. It's intelligent and wise and sentient and animistic. And like, I think just judging from what I saw from the standpoint of this indigenous healing tradition, I'm like, probably we've lost touch with that, So we're, in a sense, we have through our, the thrust of like colonialism and capitalism and all these things that, we have alienated ourselves from Mother Earth, from plants, and probably from a connection to spiritual dimensions of reality through which we can perceive and talk to beings from other parts of the galaxy. I know that sounds weird, but it's actually not that weird. We have that experience in dreams. astrology, if you're into astrology, I believe astrology is constantly connecting you to the feeling that there is an intelligence flowing through the nature of our experiences itself, so that we're not alone in experience, that we're moving through some kind of manifold field of symbolism that's oracular and intelligent and completely mind and heart blowing all the time, if we open ourselves to it. But to open ourselves to it, we have to stop alienating ourselves. So if we get in touch with life forms from other planets at this point in history, I believe the first thing it will do is draw out, potentially, hopefully, like draw out the poison of objectification, draw out the poison of our own alienation, of what we have done to take ourselves apart from the whole. It's very basic. I'm sure a million other people have said it, so I don't think my thoughts are so unique on this subject. But to me, when I think of why do people want to get in touch with aliens, archetypally, what is the drive that, makes people get so curious about UFOs and all of these things? And I believe that on some psychological level, some archetypal level, the desire to connect with aliens is the desire to reconnect ourselves to the universe. And I believe that, honestly, maybe this is pie in the sky. This is where I start getting like, you can put on my own little tinfoil hat here. If aliens came, what to me would be the coolest thing ever is if they were like, who we want to talk to first? We want to talk to some of the astrologers. We want to talk to some of the diviners, some of the shamanic people. We want to talk to some of the people who regularly alter their states as a way of talking to nature, talking to the planet. You know what I mean? Like, wouldn't that be cool? I'd be like the politicians. Man, there's cool politicians. I don't mean to talk shit. When I was in DC, I did tons of readings for politicians, people in Washington, or in the government, I should say, that were like, really wild, amazing, interesting people. So I don't at all mean to say that, but you know what I mean? Like, wouldn't it be cool if the politicians were like, why are they talking to them? I'd be like, yes. But anyway, I guess that's what I think about aliens, is that the cultural fascination with them that I think we'll see rise tremendously when it comes to Pluto's journey through Aquarius over the next 20 years will be not just because we want to connect with other life forms, but because we want to reconnect to life itself. And, Pluto in Aquarius speaks to that tendency to dissociate, but also the tendency to see ourselves as a part of a much larger sense of what it means to be alive. So, I mean, that's my hope for it all. Okay. So anyway, I hope that was fun, spirited. Right? I just want to be first in line. Like, let's talk. Have you guys ever seen the movie Arrival? I think it was called Arrival. I think it was Amy Adams and Jeremy Renner. Oh my God, that's one of my favorite movies. Watch that movie if you've never seen it. That would be the coolest way for them to arrive. Oh, okay. So anyway, I'll take one more question and we'll call it a day. Kate says, see you in masterclass again next year. Hey, that's awesome. Thank you. And by the way, all the masterclasses are on the website. And if you want to sign up for the masterclass series, you can do so for several $100s off through the Kickstarter. Okay. Let's see. My intergalactic space is full of life. I love that. That's a great line. I'm inclined to think aliens are our future selves, interstellar. Ooh, I love that. That's really cool. That's fun. All right, let's see. Yeah, I mean, Pablo Amaringo, who's a painter, ayahuasquero painter, has extraterrestrials in a lot of his paintings. It's from ayahuasca trances. It's incredible. Made my pledge. Wish it could be more influential. Sending all my best wishes for your endeavors, Adam, for you and your family. Thank you, Kate. And anything and everything is welcome. It's super. It's all super appreciated. Thank you. Let's see. Oh, this is a good question. Is the conjunction akin to the planet Mercury? Uh, yeah, you could. That's a great idea. There's no like explicit way in which that's stated in ancient astrological texts, but the conjunction is not considered an aspect in ancient astrology. It's a different category altogether. It's called a co-presence or a bodily union. Um, and every aspect that isn't a conjunction or opposition will fall into a relational dynamic where one planet is considered the yang and one is considered the yin. And sometimes they're also described as superior or inferior in their aspects to one another. So trines are of the nature of Jupiter, but one planet in the trine will be superior and one will be inferior, which does not mean better or worse. It just means one will be asserting itself and its nature onto the other planet, which will be receiving the impression and carrying the impression in its significations. So you're always making superior inferior distinctions between sextiles, squares, and trines. Oppositions and conjunctions are different. An opposition carries the meaning of Saturn. Um, Saturn is a planet that is like the master of dualities. But it's very, very important when you think of Saturn not to become overly dualistic in the way that you describe or think about Saturn itself, because there were two different ways that ancient astrologers talked about how opposites relate to one another. And this would be, remember, Saturn is the ruler of opposites, oppositions, but also archetypal opposites. And by the way, Saturn was also called neuter, like Hermes, who was neither gender, not associated with masculine or feminine, but could move fluidly between the two. So was Saturn. And the only two aspects that aren't superior or inferior, where you have a yin or a yang, are Saturn through the opposition. And then, yeah, Mercury would be a sensible assumption for the conjunction. But let me go back to Saturn. So there's two different ways that opposites can relate to one another. For ancients, they could relate in terms of black and white opposition that cannot that where there's polarization, basically good versus evil, right versus wrong. And you have people being like, it can only be this way and it can't be that way, or vice versa. So you have that kind of the tension of dualities as like warring opposites. That's one way that opposites work. The other way that they work is opposites move fluidly across a spectrum, right? First example, like more like a gradient, like it could be like more, more hot is less cold and more cold is less hot. So it's like opposites can also relate as a kind of fluid spectrum. Okay. So, and what's interesting is that opposites themselves are always working in both ways at once. So you have opposites that are always the tension of the opposites has to be held as a kind of polarization that holds the tension by means of which fluid exchange can also happen. So ancients believed that duality was duality itself was not a problem. Like in modern New Age thinking, you always hear people like, "Oh, duality is such a problem." For ancient mystics and in our traditions, and also in India, it's all over the Indian tradition as well. Opposites aren't a problem. They're like the basic language of the manifest universe. And the manifest universe, insofar as you think of it as a bad place and that there's some transcendent place that's good, you're thinking of oppositions through only one way of thinking about oppositions. Whereas if you think about the material universe as a beautiful place that's sanctified and wonderful, and transcendence can also happen within it, now you're thinking about opposites through both at the same time. You're thinking about a fluid spectrum between transcendence and immanence, while also recognizing that materiality can be a problem and sometimes you don't want to get stuck in it. So like, and that's all over Taoism as well. Taoists have the exact same way of working with opposites, which is why we see the yin and yang opposed with one speck of dark in the light and light in the dark contained within a circle. Saturn encompasses all of that, which is why it's also the dimmest, most distant planet. And it works through oppositional tension and relation, as opposed to the sun, whose principal meaning philosophically is unity, oneness, where dualities aren't present. But oh wait, Saturn and the sun are opposites. So the two are fluidly exchanging while also separate paradigms. Identification is the nature of conjunction, much like the sun. And so when you have two planets coming together in the same sign to join their bodies together, they're merging, they're becoming one. And so they're being related to each other in terms of a union. They're merging to create something totally different, which is the binding of their symbolism together. That's not an aspect, because aspects, properly speaking, are thought of as being of the nature of one of the other planets. Everything except for the opposition has a superior inferior distinction, and the opposition itself is all about the working of various dualities. It's only the conjunction where you have this kind of merging or total union and identification of one symbol with another. Maybe Mercury is the best symbol for that. Hermes was the mythical founder of astrology. Hermes was associated with the first house in the overall magnum opus, alchemically speaking, of the soul itself, which was unity, like yoga. So, I think that it's a really good question, Mango Tree Astrology. I think probably, Mercury is it's safe to assume that yes, I want to say yes. And it's never explicitly said. So, but a lot of the things that aren't explicitly said in ancient textbooks we're invited to be curious about. Like, why is it that every planet is named for every other aspect except the conjunction? It's some of those things. Vettius Valens said, for example, that astrologers deliberately wrote texts like that for us to fill in the blanks, and that those leaps that we have to take to trust our intuitive understanding of the language are the same leaps that we have to take to make intuitive understandings of symbols to be a good diviner. So I think it's totally fair to make those leaps. You just want to qualify them with a little asterisk and go like, if I find anything else, I'll come back to this, right? Kind of keep it as an ongoing inquiry, perhaps. But anyway, that was a great question, and thank you so much for asking. All righty. Arrival. I think Ashley told me to watch it, and it was absolutely stunning. Yeah, as like one of Ashley and I's favorite movie. Good to see you, Cassandra, by the way. Okay. Oh my gosh, there's so many. Yeah, so someone asked, what is your book about? There's a couple of good questions. I'll finish with these just because they're ways I can kind of promote the Kickstarter to close. If I'm a professional astrologer that wants to learn from you, what classes or courses from Nightlight would you recommend? If you have never studied ancient Hellenistic, Greek, and like the roots of like ancient horoscopic astrology, start with year one. Because even if you have a background in modern astrology, even if you're very well versed in astrology, if you've never heard the kinds of things that I'm talking about right now philosophically, you want to learn those things because they are mind-blowing and they completely change your practice of astrology. Even if you continue on with a different school of astrology, it's really nice to have the ancient background. Start with year one because there's almost nothing, even if it's houses, signs, and planets, which you think that won't be sort of brand new. By virtue of digging into the ancient perspective and all of the philosophical roots that most of the time, we don't have in modern astrology because literally the texts have only been available to us for a couple of decades now. So I would start with year one. People, once they're about 6 months into year one, most people are ready to take year two and year three whenever they want. Horary, I would wait until you're done with year one and two to take, or at least partway through year two. Unless you have some background again in ancient astrology already. So yeah. Now, thank you so much. I hope you'll come study with us, by the way. Okay, so, and then the last question that someone had, and I can't find it now, is like, what is your book about? So the first book that I wrote was called Fishers of Men, The Gospel of an Ayahuasca Vision Quest. And it was about my personal experiences with ayahuasca shamanism and unpacking like a legacy of inherited, let's call it Christian karma. And there's a lot of things that I've inherited from my father, who's a minister, from the Christian sphere in general, that is like, it will forever be with me because of how there's a really great mystical and contemplative part of the Christian faith that will always stay with me. Right. And I think that there's so many different religions around the planet, but there is always a kind of mystical, contemplative section of, like most world religions that is truly beautiful. And I've been fortunate enough to have, experiences of mystical and contemplative traditions from different parts of the world. From India, as you guys know, I actually took initiation in a lineage from the Bhakti yoga tradition, and worked with ayahuasca in various traditional settings for a decade of my life. I believe that the first book that I wrote was really about the healing and transformation of the sort of religious sphere that I had grown up in, and sort of individuating religiously. And that was what the book was about. Moving into what faith was going to look like for me. And through ayahuasca, and also doing a lot of healing in the men and the mental health in my lineage. My father, my grandfather all go through some pretty big changes in the book, which is kind of a creative memoir. So the second book I wrote comes now 14 years after my first book was published. I've taken a really long time to let my career as an astrologer develop and grow until I felt like I had something inspired to say. And what I realized that I wanted to write a book about was divination. People ask me all the time, like, well, what is astrology, or how does it work, or what do astrologers believe? And I always find myself saying something like, astrology belongs to a broader world tradition, which is contemplative, philosophical, prayerful, meditative, but it is the tradition of divination. It is the practice of learning and studying languages of signs, omens, and symbols as a way of prayer, as a way of reflection, and obviously sometimes as a way of, prediction sometimes, but mostly it's divination is about using oracular languages to deepen a conversation with the divine. And so I thought, well, how do you convey that to people? I don't want to write a textbook. I don't want to teach people astrology. I do that full time. Like, this is the interior space of what it means to have a divinatory connection through signs and symbols to like reality itself, right? So how do you explain that to someone? And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the only really good way to do so was to tell stories, which is also something, that's what I studied in graduate school. I did an MFA in creative nonfiction. So I'm a storyteller. I'm like, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to tell stories, and I'm going to tell them one chapter at a time. I'm going to write the stories one chapter at a time, 12 chapters. And I have a sense of where this is going, but I'm also going to release it as I write it, because I feel like that's very close to the way that readings work. A book written very close to the oracle's voice itself is one that is, kind of coming along rather than being pre-planned. So I started writing this book. I've got 2 chapters written, and it are stories from my life about how I think divination starts to establish itself as a way of life. And I think it's universal. Like, I think my stories are everybody's stories who has divination in their life. In some way, they're like all of our stories. But yeah, I hope you guys will enjoy it. So, and thanks for asking, because I haven't really gotten to talk so much about it yet. So it's called The Oracle Speaks. It's in the Kickstarter if you want to pick it up. All right, that is it for today. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. Adam in the principal's office, age 13. I'm a storyteller. Yes. And there is a scene in which I appear in the principal's office in the first chapter, if you've already read it. But anyway, head on over to the Kickstarter if you haven't yet. We really appreciate your support. It's been nice to do a little Q&A with you guys. nightlightastrology.com. Click on the Kickstarter 2024 link. Pitch in if you can. We really appreciate it. And thanks for all your great questions today. It was fun to do this live stream, and I will be back next week for another one. And horoscopes are tomorrow, by the way. Alex and I break down your horoscopes for December, so stay tuned for that. All right, take it easy, everyone. Bye.